accessibility reasons, I'd like to begin with a visual description of myself. I'm a white, cisgendered woman who uses the pronouns she, her. I have a physical and visible disability. I have achondroplasia, the most common form of dwarfism. I stand at the height of 3 feet 5 inches tall. I have brown hair that is typically at the length of my shoulder. Thanks to the pandemic, it's a little longer. I have brown eyes, and I'm wearing a custom Gucci double-breasted tuxedo and some pink velvet Ferragamo shoes. Apologies to Christian. Pardon. It is such a thrill and a joy to be back on the stage. And I won't lie, intimidating too. In thinking about that journey of me being 27, standing on this stage, speaking to and asking so many of the industry heroes that I'd admired since time immemorial to think of disabled people, I was probably braver then than I am now. So let's just recap for a second. There are 1 billion disabled people in the world. I think what it's important for us all to acknowledge that based on the US Census, 1 in 4 people are disabled, which means that in this space, in this room, it is not just me who's disabled. Disability can be inherited, it can be acquired. It can be permanent, it can be temporary. It can be visible, and it can be invisible. Disability spans from dwarfism to multiple sclerosis, to diabetes, to anxiety, to depression, to ADHD. My guess is there are as many of you who are part of the disabled community. Welcome. I call it the disco. When I was last here at the Business of Fashion Voices conference, I spoke a lot about the need to include disabled people. I talked to one thing specifically. I talked to the economic value of the disabled community. That annually, disabled people have a spending power of 1.9 trillion US dollars. The joy of standing on this stage is that CEOs sit very close to you. I could see their eyes widen, and immediately they were emailing their teams going, quick, this is a market we need to consider. What we have seen in the last 5 years is the fashion industry, particularly from a luxury positioning, begin to consider this market. But what happens when we design an industry for the spending power of a community? We consider disabled people only as customers, not as colleagues or as co-creators. We consider them as a population to serve, but never really to welcome. So here's a new statistic for you, and a new figure. CEOs, get your inboxes ready. Within the next 5 years, Forbes reckons that $10 billion is going to shift to those companies that position their design spending through a lens of accessibility. But what is accessibility? I want you to think for a second and imagine an accessible bathroom. How does it feel to be in there? Gross, right? The toilet is designed deliberately higher so that wheelchair users can transfer across with ease. Important, efficient. There is grab rails, probably 4 of them. There is a sink that's lower, but there's no mirror, because you know disabled people don't need to look at themselves. It is designed for disabled people, not with disabled people, only to serve their medical accommodations, not to ensure that they have dignity, pride, and get to exist in a space of beauty. So what about if we could redesign accessibility? What if we could adapt a new mindset that takes a new approach to thinking about what accessibility could be? As a design industry, why haven't you taken up that mantle? One of the key statistics that has been important to me in thinking about my trajectory in this space is that disabled people experience higher rates of unemployment. How high? 50 to 75% of disabled people are outside of the labor market because we do not consider them to have the capacity to be able to exist within our workspaces. as we have moved from a pandemic and back into physical workspaces? What does that mean, and where are the opportunities, and who are we missing? As Imran spoke to, in 2017, I stood on this stage and had big ambitions for a mission and vision that would transform a system that has not just excluded disabled people, but everyone. Did it change? Or did it change for me? I'm very fortunate to be standing in front of you in the most beautiful of ensembles. My wardrobe has transformed dramatically in 5 years. You name it, I have it. Including the Balenciaga hourglass jacket. Not the hack. It's not really fitting for me. But did my existence within the fashion industry ensure that more disabled people could have equitable access to it? Or was there a footstool on the front row? That was useful, but as we've learned from Michaela Cole, visibility can't be the only metric by which we define success. So why now? The pandemic has forced us all to reflect and to analyze who we are and the position we take hold of it, but what has this meant for disabled people? As we said earlier, there are 1 billion disabled people in the world, but let's just take the UK for a second. Throughout the pandemic here in the UK, 6 out of every 10 deaths were disabled people. In the US and the UK, hospitals across those countries had do not resuscitate orders if disabled people came in with COVID-19 because we had a currency on whose lives were valid and who got to exist. Even now, when people die of COVID-19, our first questions we ask are, did they have underlying conditions? Are they vulnerable? What we mean is, are they disabled? That ableism is entrenched in who we are, in the fabric of our society, and if we do not change our mindsets now as how we speak to and with these communities, we will never have an opportunity again. So the industry changed for me. Great. But no more. I spent the past 18 months redefining how we create systemic change through a lens that focuses on the intersectionality between disability and every other identity group. For those who don't know, intersectionality is the academic research by the extraordinary Kimberly Crenshaw. She speaks to how our identities weave into the fabric of society, but based on the identities we hold, we experience multiple marginalization based on those who have privilege and those who don't. So what does systemic change look like? I think it's 4 pillars. People, places, product, promotions. When I was here in 2017, I had enormous confidence. I think I stood beside the sea like this in a Burberry custom jacket and was like, bring it on. At the time, I wanted the fashion industry to create adaptive product. I thought that if every brand had a capsule collection of adaptive product that disabled people could go into store and buy, success. But what happens when your vision becomes othering by design? Because by creating an adaptive capsule collection, you are saying you get this much. Not all of it, just what we've decided is for you. And it may not even be available in retail locations. You may have to find it in our website, which is probably inaccessible. You get it for as long as it exists as a viable business opportunity or as something that we can utilize for marketing. I no longer believe that to be true. In October of 2020, I started a company. Because I figure if you're going to change the system, you should probably just build a new one. Through education, advocacy, and design, we tackle these 4 pillars. Because in terms of people, the reason why it's first is because it's the most important. Because do disabled people feel that they get to exist within a fashion space in which they are not just a customer, but a colleague? Disabled people are engineers by design. We are currently in Soho Farmhouse. I'm staying in the most beautiful cottage, but I cannot reach the light switch. You should see what my cottage looks like in terms of innovation. I am standing on suitcases, on bottles of olive oil. Thank you to the sponsors. You did not know your products would be used in that way, but they are. Accessibility. In order to turn on the light switches. So why is that creative talent not harnessed as part of this industry? In thinking about places, if we do not design physical places in which disabled people can be employed, we are creating an explicit invitation that says that they are not welcome. If you're creating retail spaces, does it have an elevator? Front of house and back of house? Does it have a door that opens automatically? What is the changing room like? What is the back of house like? We've talked a lot about the metaverse and creating digital spaces today, but are they accessible? Or are the same people who's designing the metaverse the same people who designed the physical world? The WCAG standards that exist for digital accessibility do not exist for the metaverse, but how can we lead through digital into the physical? So for example, if you're a brand that's creating a digital pop-up shop, put a ramp on it. If you are a brand that is leveraging third-party suppliers to create digital versions of your customers, make sure there are ones that are physically disabled, because they don't currently exist. If we're thinking about product, let's not other by design. Let's instead look at principles of universal design and look to the principles that started this industry, which was made to measure. Let's look at fabric, fixture, customization, packaging, and retail as the ways in which we create change and create opportunities for everyone. And in terms of promotions, the representation of disabled people in advertising is 0.4%. But before you rush to include disabled people in your campaigns, you must remember nothing about us without us. Hire disabled people as your story writers, your photographers, your art directors, because it's only through that storytelling will effective change come about. I think there's 5 ways in which we can create change. We need to start with awareness because we don't know what we don't know. We need allyship and advocacy. Policy change has to happen internally, then culture and system. But that's a bit complicated, so I have 5 easier tools for you. The first, disability is not a dirty word, and my apologies, not something you can avoid with flexibility. Welcome. We are so used to thinking of disability as something that makes us less, that we avoid it and have come up with synonyms: special needs, differently abled, handicapped, superheroes. Disability is wonderful. It is the only identity group that we will all be part of at one stage in our lives, because I hope we all have the privilege of getting older, but don't avoid it, because when you avoid the word, you avoid the community. Say the word disabled. It's great. With, not for. As you begin to think about disabled people, don't do it for us. You don't know. Whether that's digital accessibility, whether that's product innovation, or whether that's trying to employ us, include us from the very beginning, and don't retrofit spaces that you have always had power to design and control. Accessibility must be an explicit invitation. Don't just tell us you're welcome. Invite us. Make sure there's closed captioning, make sure there's sign language interpreting, make sure there's footstools, make sure there is a sensory environment for those with autism, that they feel welcome and safe and not overwhelmed. It must be explicit. If change is only embedded in the present, change will be a moment, not a movement. How many of you companies have scholarships with fashion design institutions prioritizing the need to amend the pipeline around disabled talent? My guess? 0. Because whilst we can bring in consultants, hello, for now, that's a moment, not a movement. Lastly, and then I promise I'll let you go. I know, 2017 was funnier. But I've learned a thing from Hannah Gadsby. I don't know if you know Hannah Gadsby. She says that for those of us who are othered, for those of us who are minority voices, we exhibit the most vulnerable parts of ourselves for everybody else's humor so that it feels easier to consume. I decided to not make you laugh this year. We've waited too long for the change. It doesn't get to be funny. It has to be really serious, because this is. So in terms of listen, learn, and lead, you are in this room either because you've been trapped and can't get out, because we're broadcasting live, or because you already have an interest in this topic. But here's the thing. Where are your colleagues? Where are the people who were supposed to be here for all 3 days and are not? I need you to go and talk to them. I need you to go and be an ally and speak to the people who are still and continue to be uncomfortable with this conversation. And I need you to ask 2 questions in every meeting that you move on from after this conference, because it is wonderful that you can be inspired by me. Sinead, she's wonderful. She looks chic. It was a great suit. But what happens next? What happens next is 5 years where we talk. But let's move to action. So 2 questions. Who's not in the room? Then prioritize the resources to make sure that they are in the room, because guess what? A budget is a moral document. Number 2, ask, is this accessible? In the most beautiful, dignity-led, innovative definition of accessibility that you can find. And the more that you ask those questions, the more it will arm us as an industry to move from awareness to action. In 2017, I asked you to recognize disabled people. But here's the thing, we've already been here. We have always been here. And after a pandemic, there was more of us because the CDC have now said that long COVID is disability. But we're also losing disabled people every day, and nobody is even talking about it. So I'd like to do it with you. I think we should start. Gur míle mágah. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.